international tax stuff. I want to talk about what it is if you're in the US, you're a US citizen, and you're doing business outside of the US. I was going to do a whole Q&A on all things international taxes and international business. And then I realized there is just so much information and so much nuance. There was no way I was going to cover everything. So I'm going to break this down into nuggets, into smaller pieces for separate videos. Also, new scenery here. I don't know if this makes sense or not. This is a little sitting area that I have in my office that I set up to do like my morning reading time and stuff like that. I felt like we were trying to make these videos more conversational, and it felt weird sitting at a desk if I was going to do more conversational. So is this better? Is this worse? Is this weird? Please don't let me be weird. Like if I'm making a fool of myself, you got to tell me. All right, so let's go foreign tax stuff, international tax stuff. This is going to be if you're a US citizen, you're living in the US, but you're doing business outside of the US. Either you're selling overseas or outside of the country, or maybe you're hiring overseas. And what does that mean? What do you have to comply with to make sure you're doing everything the right way? First, if you're selling overseas or you're selling outside of the country, you might have to comply with VAT. That stands for value added tax. It's kind of like sales tax, but not real. It is a tax that's ultimately owed by the customer that you're selling it to, but you as the seller have to collect that tax and remit it to the right taxing agency. Where this gets really complicated is every single country, and sometimes areas within those countries are going to have their own rules on VAT. How do you collect it? How much do you send? How does all that work? So if you choose to sell outside of the US, you're going to have to know the rules of the countries that you're selling to. Now, this is only going to typically apply if you're doing direct sales. If you're selling from your own website and you're shipping books overseas or shipping books outside of the country, and maybe even if you're doing digital products from your own website, you're going to have to comply with all this. But if you're using Amazon to sell outside of the country, then Amazon's going to deal with all this for you. So I have a lot of author clients who on their own website, they do US only. And if you want it internationally, you just get it from Amazon. There are big box services out there that'll set up VAT and things like that for you in other countries. So look into those. I know Avalara does sales tax. They may also do VAT. There's also some entities over like in the UK and other countries that help get this set up too. So look into those if you are interested in selling overseas direct. Now, what about spending money overseas? This one's probably a little bit more common. Like if you hire a VA from the Philippines or India or any other country, do you have to report that on a 1099? Do you have to withhold taxes? So here's what happens. If you spend money overseas to a foreign entity or a foreign person, and the money that you're giving them is considered US source income, then you may have to report that income to them on something like a 1099. It's not actually a 1099, it's a 1042. And you have to report how much you sent to that person. You may have to withhold taxes and then remit those taxes for that individual to the government, but that's only if that income is US source income. So for the most part, if you're hiring a VA from another country, that income would typically not be considered US source income because that person is doing the work in their home country on a computer in their home country. They're not coming to the US to do it for you. So I would say, generally speaking, if you're hiring a VA from the Philippines or elsewhere, you're probably fine not having to do the 1042 because that income for them would be not US source income. So what would US source income look like for somebody that you're paying overseas that would require you to have to fill out all these forms? There's one situation that comes to mind, and it was a client who is an author agent. She helps her clients get book deals from publishers. Whenever she gets the book deal from the publisher and sends the money to the client, she has to report that income to the client on a 1099 if they're a US-based client. This particular client of hers was actually in the UK. And so since the book deal included the rights worldwide, so there was source income, US source income in there because the royalties that they're going to receive or the royalties or the advance that they received is based on US sales, that's considered US source income. So instead of reporting that on a 1099, she needs to report that on a 1042 and a 1042S. Those are the forms that you say, hey, here's how much money we gave you from US source income. And then you give the government that same form saying, this is how much we gave them for US source income. If there's no like US tax treaty in place between the US and that country, and it doesn't fall under a certain umbrella, then she may need to withhold a certain amount of taxes. I think it's 30% to send to the government on that person's behalf. But under certain situations, you don't have to do that 30% withholding. In any case, if you're paying someone overseas for work, you need to get a W-9 BEN. That W-9 says, this is the person who I'm paying, this is the country that they're operating in, and if there's a 0% tax treaty in place, here's the information about that. It's the same as if you got a W-4 from somebody who you're hiring or a W-9 from someone in the US that you're giving a 1099 to. It's just information that you're gathering. You have to have it on file in case if the IRS were to ask for information about who it was you paid and why you didn't issue a 1099. Now, what if you're a US citizen and you're not living in the US, or you're not living in the US for the entire year? If you're a US citizen living outside of the country, but you're earning income that was sourced in the US, like you have a bookstore, or you have a direct sales store, or whatever the case is, and you're earning US income, you still have to file a US tax return. What you can do though is a foreign earned income exclusion, where if you lived outside of the country for a certain number of days, then you can exclude from your taxable income a certain amount. It changes every single year. But here's a trap that I've seen some clients fall into. If you elect to be taxed as an S Corp, then you suddenly don't have earned income except for the amount that you pay yourself through payroll as W-2 pay. So if you were getting the foreign earned income exclusion on the total amount of your business income, and then you switch to an S Corp, you just lost a lot of that foreign earned income exclusion because you don't have earned income anymore from the S Corp. The only earned income you have now is on your W-2. And so I've seen that trip up a lot of people where they think they're actually saving money in taxes and they are saving on self-employment tax, but then they just generated all this payroll tax and they lost their foreign earned income exclusion. So be careful if you are a US citizen living outside of the US. If you decide to go to an S Corp, you could actually be paying more taxes than you would have otherwise. One more thing I want to cover before I close this up, currency conversions. This was a question I got on a different video, but if you receive payment in one currency and then you need to convert it to your home currency, and then you make payments in that other currency, every time you convert currency from one to another, you're generating fees from the bank. So let's say US and Canada. If you get $1 US, that might be worth, say, 1.2 Canadian dollars. And I don't know what the conversion rate is right now, but let's just say it's that. Whenever you go to the bank to convert it from US dollars to Canadian dollars, the bank is going to charge you a fee. And so they might actually convert less. So you might only get 1.15 Canadian dollars for every US dollar, or vice versa. And then if you have to convert it back to US dollars, they're going to keep a little bit of that too. So the conversion rate is changed to not be in your favor every time you convert money through a bank. So if you're in Canada and you're getting paid US dollars, and then you convert it to Canadian dollars, and then you have to make payments to somebody in US dollars, and so you convert it again and then make the payment, you're losing money every time that happens. So how do you avoid losing all that money? What you could do is there are some banks that allow you to have multiple currencies within the same bank. So you'd have like multiple accounts. One would be for US dollars, one would be for Canadian dollars, maybe one would be for euros, just depending on what that bank supports. And so if you get US dollars, deposit that into the US currency account within that bank, and then whenever you make payments, pay it out of that account instead of converting it. You could choose to convert a certain amount, but maybe you just leave in that currency the amount that you'll normally need to pay those expenses. I want to say PayPal allows for this because I've seen some clients that have multiple PayPal accounts in different currencies, but there are other banks that allow you to have multiple currencies. So check with your local bank, check with banks around you to see if that's something that you can do. And if you can't do it with the bank that you're with, just Google like multi-currency bank or check PayPal even and see if there's a way that you can hold multiple currencies within the same bank without having to convert it back and forth every time. Okay, I'm going to stop this here. There's so much more international stuff that we can get into, but if there's any specific questions you have about international tax or international business, let me know and I'll see if I can answer those for you. And again, let me know what you think of this setup. I don't know if this is good or not. We're going to see if this actually sticks. And if there's any other questions that you have, please let me know. Until next time.